by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's it's a heinous crime. People are so shocked by what...
The palace had survived scandals, whispers, betrayals, and wars of bloodline loyalty. But nothing prepared Queen Camilla for the private confirmation that would strip away the one symbol she believed had sealed her place forever. In one quiet meeting, King Charles made a final decision about her coronation role, and the woman who once stood beside him as Queen Consort suddenly found herself facing a devastating truth. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move when Charles began to speak. She sat in the private sitting room with her hand pressed against the armrest, listening as the king explained that her ceremonial coronation authority would be formally limited in future royal records. That meant the duties and symbolic powers linked to her place during the coronation era would no longer be carried forward in the same way. The coronation role, in plain words, was the part she played during the sacred crowning ceremony and the honor attached to that moment afterward. For Camilla, it had never been only ceremony. It had been proof that the long road of judgment, rejection, patience, and loyalty had finally led somewhere permanent. Charles kept his voice controlled, but control did not make the words gentle. He told her the decision was about protocol, legacy, and how the monarchy would remember the transition from Queen Elizabeth's reign to his own. Protocol meant the palace rules and traditions that decide who stands where, who speaks when, and who carries which duty. Legacy meant the story left behind for history. Camilla heard those words, but beneath them, she heard something sharper. The crown was saying she had been honored, but not fully trusted with the lasting shape of the reign. The Queen Consort looked at him once, and the silence between them became colder than any argument. Charles looked, torn between affection and duty, yet his decision left no room for reversal. He had already seen the sealed palace memorandum, the private written order that confirmed this adjustment was not symbolic alone. A memorandum, simply put, is an official internal note used to record serious decisions before they become public language. This one changed how Camilla's role would be described in future ceremonial planning. It proved the matter had moved past emotion. Aides were already being instructed to prepare revised wording for royal files, future services, and internal records. Camilla finally lowered her eyes, and Charles understood then that anger would have been easier to face. Anger could be answered. Silence could not. She did not accuse him, did not plead, did not ask who had pushed him toward it. She simply sat with the knowledge that the coronation had crowned her in public, while the palace now narrowed her in private. And as the meeting ended, Charles realized the wound would not stay behind that closed door for long. This was not only a decision about ceremony, it was a decision about memory, status, and the fragile architecture of royal acceptance. For Charles, it was a sacrifice made in the name of monarchy. For Camilla, it felt like a final judgment. And for William, Catherine, and Anne, the moment exposed a painful question the palace had avoided for years. Who truly carries the future? Charles felt the weight of it before anyone else dared to speak. The king knew one private decision could become part of the monarchy's permanent story, not because people heard every word, but because palaces remember everything. Every file, every pause, every changed line becomes history one day. Camilla understood that too, and that was why the wound cut so deep. The coronation had not been just a ceremony to her. A coronation means the formal crowning of a monarch, and the people placed beside that monarch in sacred public duty. For the Queen Consort, that moment had marked her long climb from outsider to crowned companion. Camilla looked at Charles and asked the question he feared most. Had her loyalty never been enough? The king opened his mouth, then stopped, because any answer sounded cruel. If he said yes, he betrayed the decision. If he said no, he betrayed her pain. She had stood beside him through storms that would have broken weaker people. Yet now the crown seemed to be measuring her place with cold hands. Charles tried to explain that the monarchy had to protect its future shape, but she heard only the distance inside his voice. William saw the damage before anyone said it aloud. The prince waited in the corridor as Camilla left the room without speaking, and he knew at once that something irreversible had happened. His father's face carried the strain of a man who had chosen duty over comfort. The future king understood the danger too. If the bond between Charles and the Queen Consort cracked, the whole household could feel it. Not because marriage was policy, but because emotion at the center of power always spreads outward. Catherine received her briefing separately, and she listened with quiet care. The princess understood that the revision could strengthen the future line by making the next chapter clearer, but she also knew clarity could still hurt someone. Anne sensed the same truth with sharper force. The Princess Royal believed the move was bigger than Camilla herself. It was about stopping blurred authority before it confused the crown's path. One name kept returning in private conversations, not as an accusation, not yet, but as each person absorbed the decision, the question became impossible to ignore. Who first challenged Camilla's expanded coronation symbolism? And the deeper everyone looked, the more one forgotten royal moment began to look like the spark that lit the fire. Every palace crisis has a beginning, but this one did not begin with shouting. It began with a ceremony, a pause, and one glance that senior courtiers never forgot. Months before Charles confirmed the final decision, a single moment during a private coronation anniversary service caused unease inside the royal household, and later, everyone would look back and call it the point of no return. William noticed the change before the first words were spoken. The prince looked down at the altered order of service, and his expression tightened in a way Catherine understood instantly. An order of service means the printed plan of who speaks, who reads, and what happens during a royal ceremony. This service was private, held inside St. George's Chapel for senior family members and palace officials. But private did not mean harmless. In the royal world, even a quiet reading can carry power, because every roll tells the room who belongs closest to history. Camilla had been given a ceremonial reading that many expected would go to a direct representative of the future line. A ceremonial reading means a formal passage spoken during a service, often chosen to reflect duty, faith, and royal meaning. The Queen Consort believed it was a sign of trust after years beside Charles, but William saw something else. He saw a symbol moving too far from the line of succession. Catherine placed her hand over his, not to silence him, but to steady him. The princess knew his reaction mattered. If he challenged the moment too openly, it would wound Camilla. If he ignored it, the future could look weak. Camilla saw the movement between them. She saw William stiffen, saw Catherine calm him, and the hurt rose in her before she could stop it. The monarch's wife had endured judgment for years, and this small reaction felt like the old doubts returning in polished royal language. Charles sensed the tension too, but he let the service continue. The king chose stillness because interruption would have turned unease into scandal. Yet his silence did not erase what everyone had seen. Anne understood the danger with brutal clarity. After the service, the Princess Royal closed the booklet, looked at Charles and said, "This cannot become the pattern." Her warning was later remembered in a documented private account prepared for senior household officials. She did not speak out of cruelty toward Camilla. She spoke because the moment had created confusion about where symbolic authority ended and dynastic authority began. That moment became known behind closed doors as the St. George's Chapel reading incident. It sounded small to outsiders, but inside the palace, it carried the weight of a fracture. Camilla thought the day had merely exposed old suspicion. Charles knew it had planted something more dangerous. And that sentence did not explode in the chapel, but it followed him into every room until confrontation became impossible to avoid. When Camilla finally confronted Charles, there were no courtiers to soften the words, no private secretaries to arrange the truth into polite language, and no protocol experts to hide behind tradition. There was only a husband, a king, and a woman who believed the crown had accepted her at last. Then Charles set the file down, and the room changed forever. Charles invited her in without ceremony, and that alone told Camilla how serious it had become. The king did not ask aides to remain. He did not let officials sit nearby with careful notes and polished phrases. A constitutional matter means an issue tied to the rules and future order of the monarchy, not just personal feeling. But this was also personal. It touched her place beside him, her years of loyalty, and the fragile peace she thought the coronation had finally given her. Camilla looked at the file and knew before opening it that the wound was already written. The file carried the final wording confirming her reduced ceremonial coronation authority in future palace records. Ceremonial authority means the symbolic duties and honors connected to a royal role, especially during services, anniversaries, and official moments. The Queen Consort asked whether the monarchy was rewriting her place. Charles held himself still and said the crown had to protect the future, even when the present suffered. The words were calm. The damage was not. Camilla did not explode. She did something worse. She broke quietly. Her voice lowered, her face tightened, and the sadness in her eyes made Charles look away. The king could face anger. He could defend policy. But he could not easily face the pain of the woman who had stood beside him through years of public judgment. She asked him if all the waiting, all the loyalty, all the humiliation had only earned her a temporary place in history. He struggled to answer, because the truth had edges. Charles finally revealed what she feared most. The decision had not been forced by one person. It had become unavoidable after repeated concerns from senior family members. Concerns recorded in a private briefing note prepared for the monarch after the chapel incident. William had understood the direction. Catherine had been briefed. Anne had warned him plainly. Camilla heard those names and felt the betrayal deepen, not because they hated her, but because they had seen the decision coming before she did. Camilla pushed the file back across the table without reading the final page. "Some decisions do not need signatures to leave scars," she told him. Charles said nothing. The room held its breath around them. Then the Queen Consort made one final request, a request that could either protect her dignity or expose the rupture to the entire household. And behind that painful exchange stood a larger force, one even Charles could not ignore. The monarchy does not move only through emotion. It moves through rules, precedents, memory, and the invisible weight of those who know how history judges a crown. Charles may have spoken the final words, but the decision carried the pressure of the future line, the discipline of royal protocol, and the sharp instincts of those determined to stop confusion before it became crisis. Charles sat alone with the advisory note in front of him, and the silence felt heavier than any argument. The king understood that this was no longer only about Camilla's feelings or his own guilt. It was about separating personal loyalty from constitutional symbolism. Constitutional symbolism means the public meaning attached to royal roles, the kind that tells people who represents the future of the monarchy and who stands beside it in support. Camilla had earned respect beside him, but the crown could not allow respect to become unclear authority. Charles read the note again, and exhaustion settled over him. Senior advisors had argued that Camilla's coronation role must be honored historically, but not expanded into continuing power. Continuing authority meant lasting influence in future ceremonies, records, and royal planning after the original coronation moment had passed. The king knew why that mattered. If the palace allowed one role to stretch too far, every future duty could become a battlefield. Yet protecting the crown meant hurting the woman beside him, and that truth struck him harder than any line on the page. William chose his words carefully in the private briefing. The prince did not want Camilla humiliated. and he made that clear more than once. But he also insisted that respect for the Queen Consort could not blur the future monarchy. The future king knew the public looked to him and Catherine for what came next. If the royal structure became confused now, his own reign could inherit the damage later. His concern was not personal revenge. It was control before uncertainty became tradition. Anne's earlier warning gave the review its sharpest edge. The Princess Royal had already told Charles, through a documented private account prepared after the chapel service, that the pattern could not continue. Her words carried force, because she had spent a lifetime understanding how small royal gestures become permanent expectations. Catherine's role was quieter, but just as important. The princess supported clarity, yet urged that Camilla not be publicly stripped of dignity. She knew strength without mercy could look like cruelty. Charles lifted the fountain pen, then stopped above the approval line. For a moment, the king seemed to carry both his wife's pain and the monarchy's future in one hand. Then he placed the pen down, waited, and signed minutes later in silence. One revised phrase in the draft would soon start the first wave of fallout, and once that approval was given, the decision stopped being a private wound and began moving through the palace like a cold draft under a locked door. The fallout did not arrive as a public announcement. It arrived in changed schedules, careful pauses, and faces that looked away too quickly. Camilla did not need a press release to understand what had happened. She saw it in the revised briefing notes, heard it in the softened language, and felt it in the sudden distance of a household trying to pretend nothing had shifted. Camilla read the revised page twice, and the color seemed to leave her face. The Queen Consort folded the paper carefully, then placed it on the table as though touching it any longer would make the truth more painful. Palace staff had begun updating internal ceremonial references, replacing expanded language about her coronation role with narrower historical wording. Internal references mean the private notes and planning terms used by royal officials before anything reaches the public. To outsiders, those words may have looked small. Inside the monarchy, they were everything. Charles knew the change had entered the machinery of the crown, and that made it harder to stop. The king understood that future service planning, anniversary references, and royal records would now frame Camilla's place differently beside his reign. Service planning means the official preparation for royal ceremonies, prayers, readings, seating, and duties. Anniversary references are the words used when the palace marks past royal events. These details mattered because history often remembers the language before it remembers the feeling. If the wording changed, the memory changed with it. Camilla saw the removed phrase before anyone explained it. Continuing ceremonial authority had disappeared from the draft, and a senior courtier noticed it too. Ceremonial authority meant the lasting symbolic power attached to her role after the coronation moment itself. Its removal confirmed what the Queen Consort already feared. This was not just softer language. This was a real reduction. She had not been loudly stripped of honor. She had been quietly narrowed, and somehow that felt even colder. Charles tried to reach her before the silence became permanent. The monarch came to her door and asked for a private conversation, but Camilla refused the first attempt. He stood outside the closed door longer than pride allowed, then walked away carrying the cost of his own signature. William was told the changes had begun, and the prince said almost nothing. His silence carried relief, but guilt moved beneath it. The future king wanted clarity for the monarchy, yet he knew clarity had left someone wounded. Camilla's first public absence made the private rupture harder to hide. She unexpectedly withdrew from a small royal appearance, forcing the palace to explain her absence with careful words and calm faces. But careful words could not cover everything. The household felt the shift. Charles felt it most of all. Yet the moment that changed everything was not written in a file. It happened when two people finally faced each other without the crown between them. After days of silence, the palace expected another confrontation. Instead, what came was quieter and more devastating. Camilla agreed to meet Charles privately, not as Queen Consort and King, but as two people trapped inside a decision neither could escape. No aides entered, no notes were taken, and for the first time, the pain beneath the protocol was spoken plainly. Camilla entered the room with the kind of calm that frightened Charles more than anger. The Queen Consort had refused him once, and he knew this meeting was not a return to peace. It was a test of whether anything tender could survive what the crown had demanded. Institutional pressure means the force of rules, advisors, duties, and history pressing down on personal choices. This time, none of that stood between them. No officials, no carefully shaped phrases, no one to turn pain into policy. Charles spoke first, and his voice carried the tired weight of a man who had rehearsed the truth too many times. The king told Camilla the decision was meant to preserve the monarchy's future, not erase their shared past. The monarchy's future meant the next line of kings, queens, ceremonies, and public trust that would outlive them both. He said the crown could not afford blurred authority, because confusion at the top becomes weakness everywhere below. Yet even as he explained it, he knew the words could not fully comfort her. Camilla listened, then finally said what had been sitting inside her since the file was placed before her. She felt as if the crown had accepted her only to limit her when history became uncomfortable. The coronation had raised her in front of the world, but now the record seemed to be drawing a smaller circle around her name. Charles did not deny the pain. He told her he could not undo the decision, but he would not allow the palace to turn it into humiliation. The king had made the choice. Now he had to carry its mercy too. Camilla asked for one thing. She wanted the official language to still recognize her loyalty during the coronation chapter. Official language means the exact words used in palace records, statements, and ceremonial planning. Words that later become the memory people quote as truth. The Queen Consort did not ask for power back. She asked not to be reduced to an uncomfortable footnote. Charles agreed. He promised the final wording would protect her dignity, even if it could not restore what had been taken. Charles reached across the table, and Camilla did not take his hand at first. The silence stretched. Then, after a long pause, she let her fingers rest beside his. It was not forgiveness, not fully, but it was the first softening after days of ice. The private rupture had not healed, yet it had stopped bleeding. And with that fragile understanding in place, the palace prepared for the outside world to discover what had changed. By morning, the palace could no longer control the shape of the story. What had begun behind closed doors became a national drama about loyalty, legacy, and the limits of royal acceptance. For some, Camilla had been unfairly wounded after years of service. For others, Charles had finally drawn a necessary line. But one public image turned palace tension into national conversation. Camilla watched the coverage in silence, and every careful word felt louder than accusation. The Queen Consort turned away when her coronation image appeared beside the revised language, because the contrast was too painful. A palace briefing means an official note given to journalists or royal commentators to explain planned events and wording. This one was tied to future coronation anniversary planning, which meant the story was no longer trapped inside private rooms. It had touched the public record, and once royal language reaches the outside world, it becomes almost impossible to pull back. Charles heard the morning headlines and looked stricken. The king had made the decision for stability, yet now he saw the cost playing across every broadcast. Broadcasters framed it as a defining test of his reign and of Camilla's place in royal history. A reign means the period of time a king or queen rules, and every reign needs a clear story if the public is going to trust it. Charles wanted that clarity, but clarity had wounded the person closest to him, and the victory of order suddenly felt painfully cold. Camilla saw the front page before anyone could hide it from her. The headline read, "Camilla's crowned role cut back. Charles chooses legacy over loyalty." Those words landed like a second decision. The Queen Consort had survived years of judgment, but this was different. This was not old scandal returning. This was the country debating whether her crowned role had always been temporary. She did not speak. She simply looked away, and the silence around her said what no palace statement could soften. Charles listened as a morning presenter held up the paper and said, "This is not a divorce of affection. It is a separation of symbolism." The phrase spread fast because it sounded clean, almost elegant, but the king knew the truth was messier. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered. Some held flowers for Camilla, seeing her as a woman hurt after years of service. Others argued the decision was necessary discipline, a line drawn to protect William, Catherine, and the future monarchy. Camilla understood then that the private wound had become a public lesson. Charles understood it too. The palace prepared one final statement, not to reverse the decision, but to define what it truly meant. The monarchy would not deny the pain. It would not undo the line. And when the final words came, they did not restore what the Queen Consort had lost, but they finally revealed why the crown had chosen this path. In the end, the decision did not destroy Camilla, and it did not free Charles from the pain of making it. It did something more complicated. It showed that the monarchy can honor a person while still limiting a role, that love can exist beside duty, and that the crown always demands a price from those who stand closest to it. Camilla accepted the final wording with a sadness no palace phrase could hide. The Queen Consort understood that her coronation role would remain part of history, but it would not carry expanded ceremonial authority into the future. Ceremonial authority means the lasting symbolic power attached to royal duties, services, records, and public moments after the original ceremony has passed. Her place beside Charles was not erased. Her service was not denied. But the reach she believed had been secured on Coronation Day had been quietly, firmly limited. Charles confirmed the decision stood, and the king felt every inch of its cost. He made sure the final language recognized Camilla's loyalty, her service, and her place beside him during his reign. A reign means the period of time a monarch rules, and for him, that story could not be written without the woman who had stood beside him through years of storm. But the monarchy could not survive if personal emotion overtook constitutional clarity. Constitutional clarity means the rules and public meaning must be easy to understand, so the future line is never confused. William and Catherine emerged from the crisis not with victory, but with restraint. The prince did not celebrate what had happened, because he knew the decision had wounded Camilla deeply. The princess carried the same quiet discipline, understanding that the future monarchy had been strengthened, but not without pain. Their role became clear through silence, not triumph. They represented the line ahead, the next chapter, the structure that Charles had chosen to protect, even when it hurt the present. Anne's warning proved decisive. The Princess Royal had seen the danger before others wanted to name it, and her private words to Charles became part of the force behind the final review. The old guard had acted not out of cruelty, but out of loyalty to the crown itself. Sentiment had come close to stretching structure too far. Anne knew that once a royal symbol becomes expectation, it is almost impossible to take back without pain. This time, the pain came anyway. Camilla later stood beside Charles at a private reception, composed but changed. The king gently adjusted his cuff and kept his gaze forward, while the Queen Consort held herself with dignity that looked almost like armor. Both of them knew the old certainty between them had ended. She had not been rejected as a woman. She had been redefined as a royal figure. He had not abandoned his wife. He had chosen the institution's future over the comfort of the present. The final truth was brutal, but clear. Camilla kept her place beside Charles, but not the full symbolic reach she believed the coronation had secured. The king kept her dignity intact, but placed the crown above her pain. The monarchy survived, colder, clearer, and stronger, by drawing a line through the heart of its most complicated partnership. This was not the end of a marriage, or the fall of a queen. It was the moment the crown reminded everyone that no personal victory is ever larger than the throne itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.